I know what you're thinking. How could I not see it? For 20 years, 2 decades of my life, I called this woman my best friend while she was meticulously taking a scalpel to every good thing I had. I told her everything, my fears, my ambitions, the exact moment I realized I was falling for my husband. She would nod, smile, and hug me so tight I truly believed she meant it. But 3 months ago, I was standing in her kitchen, holding a piece of paper she carelessly left on the counter, a single, simple, devastating note. In that flash, I understood the last 2 decades had been a masterpiece of psychological manipulation, and the architect of my chaos was standing right next to me. Right now, hit the like button if you've ever doubted your own sanity because of a friend. I want you to ask yourself, how much of your trust are you willing to surrender before you finally dare to look behind the smile? I need to take you back to the beginning to truly show you the horror of the illusion. Clara wasn't just a friend, she was my sanctuary. We met in the chaotic dorms of State University, 2 anxious outsiders who instantly found our anchor in each other. I truly believed she was my soul mirror. We shared every secret, every dream written in cheap composition notebooks, even the exact moment I realized I was falling for my husband, years later. That's why the betrayal was such a clean slice. She held the blueprint to my entire emotional life. This wasn't a casual acquaintance, this was my closest confidant, the person who made me feel most secure. But looking back, I realized the golden cage was always there. Whenever I achieved a milestone, I got the internship, I won a small scholarship, Clara's joy was always too loud. It would inevitably overshadow the actual achievement. She'd accidentally lose the acceptance letter, or she'd orchestrate a huge, chaotic party that ended with my having to clean up and missing the celebration itself. It was always couched as supreme effort and care. "Oh, I tried so hard to make this special for you," she would lament, pulling my focus away from the success and back onto her effort. I loved her for trying. I excused her for failing. I never, not once, connected the dots between her intense support and my constant, inexplicable setbacks. I just assumed that, unlike Clara, I was inherently clumsy, or perhaps, simply destined for constant near misses. But it wasn't fate. It was management. She was the keeper of my vulnerabilities, and every time I leaned on her, she tightened the grip. I felt secure because she created the environment where I constantly needed her support to recover from the strange misfortunes that seemed to follow me. I never questioned why she was the only consistent thing in my unpredictable life. I just assumed I was lucky to have her. I never considered that the unpredictability might be coming straight from the person I trusted most. I was blind to the architecture of the cage she built. The problems started small, like static interference I learned to live with. I'd be excited about a promising date, and I'd tell Clara every detail. The next day, the guy would go cold. No reason, no fight, just silence. Later, I'd hear from a mutual friend that Clara had casually mentioned something about me, something small, maybe that I had a reputation for being high maintenance, or that I was in a really dark place right now. Nothing defamatory, just tiny, poisonous whispers that traveled through our social circle like a subtle virus. It never came back to Clara, the source was always untraceable. I internalized the failures. I started questioning my own actions, my own attractiveness. I'd ask Clara, "What am I doing wrong?" and she would wrap me in a comforting blanket of doubt. "Oh, honey, you're just too intense for these guys. They can't handle how complex you are." That statement, "You're too complex," became her safety net. It flattered my ego while simultaneously explaining away my repeated failures, locking me further into her support system. The closer I got to genuine happiness, the more intense the whisper campaign became. She was a silent, meticulous curator of my despair. I realized now she was actively pushing people away before they could get too close, maintaining her exclusive position in my life. I used to believe that friends only tell you the truth to protect you. I have a question for you. What if the truth they tell you about yourself or your relationships is carefully designed not to protect you, but to keep them essential? Have you ever had a relationship where the advice always seemed to isolate you? The creative director job was supposed to be my breakthrough. It was a high-stakes role, and I poured every drop of my ambition into preparing for it. I told Clara every detail, the panel members, the strategy, even the weakness I planned to frame as a strength. The night before the final interview, she insisted on distracting me, filling the air with old, shared memories that bled into my insecurities, reminding me of that time I completely choked during a presentation in college. I felt exhausted and anxious going into the interview. I bombed it. I knew I had. The next morning, the supposed panic call came. I just sent a super important work email, client names, budget figures, to your email address by mistake. Please, delete it immediately before I get fired. I deleted it immediately, terrified for her job. My adrenaline spiked. 2 days later, I was rejected. The official feedback stated I lacked emotional stability under pressure. I never connected her stress-inducing behavior the night before with the rejection. I only saw myself as the failure, and her as the victim of an email mistake. That deleted file became the perfect red herring that pointed away from the actual sabotage. I realize now that the email was the perfect distraction to cover the fact that she likely sabotaged the interview itself. A question I ask myself. If your career was on the line, and your closest friend made a frantic request under the guise of an emergency, would you trust them immediately, or would the doubt force you to look at that file first? What is the real cost of blind loyalty? Then came David. He was everything Clara wasn't, calm, logical, and uninterested in drama. When I introduced him, I saw a flicker of something cold in her eyes, even as she gave him the typical Clara love bomb treatment, claiming they had a special connection. But she started creating distance immediately. She would forget to include him in joint invitations. She'd drop hints about my wilder ex-boyfriends whenever David was within earshot, making him feel like he was constantly missing a crucial piece of my history. It wasn't enough to start a fight, it was just enough to make him feel uneasy in our space. The closer the wedding got, the more I saw her control fray. I had put her in charge of communicating with my planner. 2 weeks out, my photographer called me, totally stressed, saying Clara had called demanding a chaotic, last-minute switch to neon colors as an artistic statement. I felt sick with panic. Clara swore she was just joking to relieve stress. I saw the flicker of malice when she offered the excuse, but I told myself it was just her being chaotic. I was blinded by my loyalty to her. Her act was failing, and I realized now she was calculating her next, more destructive move to sabotage my happiness. What would you do when a friend attempts to sabotage a major life event like your wedding, but frames it as an innocent joke? Do you confront the malice you feel, or accept the plausible excuse you hear? Which is more dangerous? David and I hit a normal, healthy rough patch. I called Clara, desperate for comfort. This was the moment she had been patiently waiting for. I was vulnerable, emotional, and seeking her solace. She listened perfectly, giving me space to vent, but when it was her turn to speak, she delivered the surgical strike. She looked me dead in the eye, comforting me, and then she delivered the devastating line, "He doesn't value you the way I do." I let it sink in. That indictment played on loop in my head for days. Days later, the crisis exploded. David found an anonymous message sent through an old social media account, a message suggesting I was unhappy and actively looking for a way out of the marriage. The message detailed specific, private frustrations I had only ever shared with Clara. Our argument turned into a marriage crisis overnight. I defended Clara, of course, telling David it was a cruel troll. But the seed of doubt, planted by her subtle comment, had already taken root in my mind. I realized now her advice had just been her giving herself permission to attack my marriage, and my desperate trust had given her the ammunition. If someone you trust gives you advice that undermines your primary relationship, is that still genuine support? Or is it planting a deliberate, poisonous seed designed to rot the core of your life? I was at a low point. David and I were barely speaking, and I felt utterly reliant on Clara's emotional support. The climax arrived because I canceled a much-needed trip with David to rush to Clara's side for a supposed severe medical emergency she claimed to have. I arrived, my heart pounding, convinced I was about to face a disaster. But the emergency was just a headache, and she seemed oddly calm, almost triumphant, that I was there instead of repairing my marriage. I felt foolish, angry at myself, but I stayed to make her tea. I forced myself to ignore the glaring red flag. When she went into the laundry room, that's when I saw it. On the kitchen counter, tucked beneath an empty wine glass, was a scrap of paper she must have pulled from her pocket, a simple, neat, horrifying note to self, almost like a trophy from a successful hunt. I reached for it, not snooping, but driven by a sudden, primal urge of self-preservation. The handwriting was hers. Detail the note, it read, must remember to delete the attachment from the Creative Director panel folder. She still thinks she deleted it. It was the single, undeniable piece of evidence that proved she had not only sabotaged my career years ago but had kept a trophy, a record of the crime. The blood left my head. All the years of self-doubt, all the social slights, all the marital crises, they crashed down on me in that exact moment, validated by that single, cheap piece of paper. I saw the architectural blueprint of her golden cage laid bare. I finally understood the terrifying truth. I had been right all along. The chaos wasn't my fault, it was hers. The validation was a cold, sick relief. I held the paper in my hand, and for the first time in 20 years, I felt completely, terrifyingly, alone, but entirely sane. I walked to the laundry room, holding the proof. I didn't yell, I didn't even cry. My body felt heavy, my voice a level, cold thing I barely recognized. I just held out the note to her. Clara's face went through 3 terrifying stages: shock at being caught, a flicker of raw panic, and finally, a look of cold, satisfied triumph. She didn't deny it. She just looked at me, her former best friend, her victim, and whispered the final, devastating truth: someone had to keep you grounded. That phrase, so arrogant, so utterly lacking in remorse, implying her betrayal was some kind of necessary intervention, was her confession and her explanation. In that moment, I understood that I was never her friend, I was her project. I walked out and never saw her again. It took a year of intense therapy to trust my own judgment again. The betrayal was less painful than the knowledge that I had been fundamentally wrong about my own life for 20 years. The biggest lesson I learned? The greatest danger isn't the person you fear, but the person who claims to be your sanctuary. You have to listen to that quiet, persistent voice of doubt, even when everyone tells you it's just paranoia. That voice, that anxiety you feel when something doesn't add up, is often the purest form of self-preservation. I learned to trust my paranoia because it was the only part of me she hadn't managed to silence. If you felt that intense anxiety, that fear of manipulation, you are not alone. We share these true life stories here every week. Subscribe to come sit with me for more narratives that will make you rethink your world. Here's the question I'm still trying to answer, knowing that she confessed with that cold, twisted smile, and knowing the chaos she caused. If you were me, what would you have done with that piece of paper? Would you have confronted her, called the police, or simply walked away and deleted her existence forever? Tell me what you would have done in the comments below.